buses at night aren't actually buses. I've always been a bit of a night owl, usually wide awake well past midnight. It's a habit from my college days where late-night study sessions became the norm, and it's never really left me. After graduating, I moved to Los Angeles for a job, hoping the city's endless energy would suit my nocturnal lifestyle. But despite the time that's passed, I'm still not quite used to everything, the sprawling neighborhoods and the constant noise. Initially, I'd planned to stay with my parents, but we had a falling out just before my move. The argument stemmed from my grandmother's will. When she passed, I was left out entirely while my parents inherited everything. Feeling betrayed and resentful, I decided I couldn't live under their roof. With limited options and time running out, I settled for a small, dingy apartment in a shadier part of town. My apartment overlooks one of the busier streets in the area, so I've become accustomed to the sounds of traffic at all hours. The hum of engines and distant sirens have turned into a kind of white noise that usually lulls me to sleep. But recently, something strange has been happening that keeps me awake. It started a few weeks ago. I'd be up late, reading or watching TV, and I'd hear buses going by. Normally, the last bus in our neighborhood runs until around 11 p.m., but I'd started hearing buses rumble by well past that time. At first, I brushed it off, thinking the city might have extended the hours or added a new route, but curiosity got the better of me. One night, around 1 a.m., I finally got the courage to peek out of my window. The streets were quiet, almost eerily so, and the air had that peculiar, heavy stillness that only appears in the dead of night. I scanned the street and saw it, a bus idling at the corner, its interior lights flickering dimly. I watched for a few minutes, waiting to see if anyone would get on or off, but the bus just sat there. The sight left me unsettled, but I couldn't muster the nerve to go outside. Over the next few nights, the bus kept appearing at the same time, idling in the same spot. Each time I would watch from my window, my curiosity and unease growing with each sighting. Finally, one night I decided enough was enough. I threw on my jacket and headed downstairs. The streets were as silent and still as before, amplifying the dread building inside me. As I reached the corner of my block, I saw the bus again, its lights still flickering. I knew I had to find out what was going on. Approaching the bus, I took a closer look. It looked like a standard city bus, nothing about it screamed unusual. Its exterior was weathered, the paint chipped and peeling in spots, but otherwise it seemed like any other bus. My heart pounded as I hesitated, standing just outside the door. The door creaked open on rusty hinges, piercing the stillness of the night and sending a shiver down my spine. Without hesitation, I climbed aboard, dropping an old, worn dollar bill into the box as I made my way to the back of the bus. The driver, a shadowy figure in a worn uniform, didn't speak or even look at me, just stared straight ahead as if I didn't exist. I settled into one of the seats near the rear, a sense of unease creeping over me. The bus interior was dimly lit, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows on the worn, cracked seats. The air smelled faintly of mildew and old leather, mixed with a metallic scent of rust. Graffiti covered the walls and backs of seats, some fresh, some faded. A few seats had stuffing spilling out, torn from years of use. The windows were grimy and cobwebs clung to the corners, swaying slightly with the motion of the bus. The floor was littered with old ticket stubs, wrappers, and other debris, adding to the sense of decay and abandonment. As the bus started moving, I glanced out the window, expecting to see familiar streets. Instead, the scenery quickly changed to a desolate area filled with abandoned warehouses and empty roads. The warehouses were dilapidated, their windows shattered and walls covered in graffiti. Rusted machinery and abandoned vehicles littered the grounds, creating a post-apocalyptic landscape. My heart began to race, and a cold sweat broke out across my forehead. I looked around, noticing the eerie emptiness outside, not a single car or person in sight. I pulled out my phone, hoping to check my location, but there was no signal. Oddly, my battery was at 2%, even though it had been fully charged when I left. The screen flickered uselessly before going dark. Panic surged through me as I realized something was terribly wrong. Desperate, I tried to walk toward the front of the bus, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. Each step was a struggle, my movements slow and labored. I reached out to steady myself, my fingers brushing against the cold, worn metal of the seats. The air inside felt heavy, pressing down on me and making it even harder to move. "What's going on?" I demanded, my voice trembling. But the driver remained silent, his eyes fixed on the road ahead, completely unresponsive. His face was partially obscured by the dim light, giving him an almost ghostly appearance. I fumbled for the door, trying to push it open with all my might, but it wouldn't budge. Panic rising, I spotted the emergency release lever. I grabbed it, yanking hard, but nothing happened. The lever felt rusted, stuck in place as if it hadn't been used in years. I pounded on the window, hoping to attract someone's attention, but the streets outside were deserted, the buildings looming like silent sentinels in the dark. The bus seemed to be moving faster now, the scenery outside blurring into a nightmarish haze. The desolation of the warehouses gave way to an even more unsettling landscape, one that seemed to shift and change with each passing second. My heart pounded in my chest, a frantic drumbeat of fear and desperation. I turned back to the driver, only to find his seat empty. My stomach dropped and panic washed over me like a tidal wave. Sweat began to bead on my forehead as my breath came in shallow, rapid gasps. The reality of the situation hit me hard, and I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. I looked around frantically, my eyes darting to the windows and the door, searching for any way out. The windows were clouded with grime, and the door remained stubbornly shut. I noticed the dashboard covered in strange, glowing symbols that I couldn't understand. The symbols pulsed with an unnatural light, casting eerie shadows on the cracked vinyl of the driver's seat. The sight of them made my skin crawl, a deep sense of unease settling in my gut. Desperation mounting, I pressed buttons and pulled levers, hoping to stop the bus or open the doors, but nothing worked. Each button I pressed gave a faint, unresponsive click, and the levers felt stiff and immovable under my trembling fingers. My heart pounded louder with each passing second, the fear gripping me tighter. The symbols on the dashboard seemed to glow brighter, as if mocking my futile attempts to escape. Suddenly, I felt a blunt force hit the back of my head. Pain exploded in my skull and my vision blurred. I tried to stay conscious, but the darkness quickly swallowed me, as if I were being submerged in a black sea. The sound of my own heartbeat echoed in my ears. I woke with a start, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I couldn't move, the terror of the dream still gripping me. The memory of the bus and its ominous interior flashed through my mind, mixing with the lingering pain in my head. Slowly, I glanced around, disoriented, before realizing I was safe in my own bed. The familiar sight of my room provided some comfort, but the remnants of fear lingered like a haunting shadow. As I sat up, I felt something crumpled in my hand. Pulling it out, I found a dollar bill, the same one I had dropped into the fare box on the bus. Its edges were creased, and the surface was slightly worn, as if it had passed through many hands. But what froze my blood was the message scrawled across it in shaky handwriting. "Next time you won't wake up." The words seemed to burn into the paper, each letter a twisted promise of something malevolent lurking just beyond my perception. Fear clenched at my heart as I stared at the words, the memory of the nightmare still fresh in my mind. Had it all been just a dream? As the days passed, the memory of the nightmare lingered, haunting me like a shadow. I found myself avoiding the late-night streets, the once familiar sounds now tinged with an unsettling edge. No matter how hard I tried to distract myself, the image of that empty bus and the chilling message on the dollar bill remained etched in my mind like sinister graffiti. Then, one night, as I lay awake in bed, the silence was shattered by a distant rumble, a low growl of an engine, unmistakably the sound of a bus pulling up to the stop outside my window. My heart froze in my chest as I listened, the fear creeping back in like an unwelcome specter. The train I usually take has changed its course. It is now headed nowhere. The gentle sway of the train car had always been soothing to me. As a regional sales manager for a large pharmaceutical company, I spent more time on trains than in my own bed. The rhythmic clack of wheels on the tracks was my lullaby, and the ever-changing landscape outside my window became a constant companion. This particular Tuesday evening found me on yet another overnight train, heading from Chicago to New York for a critical meeting. I settled into my usual routine, laptop out, spreadsheets open, a cup of mediocre coffee cooling on the fold-down tray. The first sign that something was wrong came about 3 hours into the journey. I glanced at my watch, frowning slightly. We should have reached Cleveland by now, but the scenery outside remained stubbornly rural, fields and forests bathed in the eerie glow of a full moon. I flagged down a passing attendant, a middle-aged woman with graying hair and a pinched expression. "Excuse me," I said, "but shouldn't we have reached Cleveland by now?" She gave me a strange look, her eyes slightly unfocused. Cleveland. I'm sorry, sir, but I'm not familiar with that stop. Perhaps you're thinking of a different route. Before I could respond, she hurried away, disappearing into the next car. I sat back, puzzled. How could she not know Cleveland? It was a major stop on this line. I shook my head, chalking it up to a new employee's confusion, and returned to my work. As the hours ticked by, my unease grew. The landscape outside never changed, an endless loop of moonlit fields and shadowy forests. My phone had lost signal long ago, and my watch seemed to malfunction, its hands spinning wildly before stopping altogether. I decided to stretch my legs, hoping a walk through the train might clear my head. As I made my way through the cars, I noticed how eerily quiet it was. The few passengers I saw sat motionless in their seats, staring blankly ahead or out the windows. In the dining car, I found an elderly man hunched over a cup of coffee, his wrinkled hands trembling slightly as he lifted the mug to his lips. "Excuse me," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I don't mean to bother you, but have you noticed anything strange about this journey?" The old man's eyes focused on me, a flicker of recognition passing across his face. "You're new, aren't you?" he said, his voice a dry whisper. "First time on this line?" I nodded, a chill running down my spine. "What do you mean, this line? This is just the regular Chicago to New York route, isn't it?" He let out a wheezing laugh that turned into a cough. "Oh, my boy," he said, shaking his head. "This ain't no regular route. This here's the last line. Ain't no New York we're headed to." "I don't understand," I said, my heart beginning to race. "Where are we going, then?" The old man leaned in close, the smell of stale coffee on his breath. "Nowhere," he whispered. "Everywhere. This train don't stop, son. It just keeps going round and round, world without end." I jerked back, convinced I was dealing with a madman. "That's impossible," I said. "Every train has to stop eventually." He just smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "You go on believing that if it makes you feel better. But mark my words, you'll see. We all figure it out sooner or later." I stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over my chair. "You're crazy," I muttered, backing away. "This is just a normal train. We'll be in New York by morning." As I turned to leave, the old man called out, "What's your name, son?" I hesitated for a moment before answering. Jack Thurston." He nodded slowly. "Well, Jack Thurston, I'm Howard. I'll be seeing you around. We've got all the time in the world, after all." I hurried back to my seat, Howard's words echoing in my mind. It was nonsense, of course. Trains didn't just go on forever. There had to be a rational explanation for the delays and the strange behavior of the staff. As I sank into my seat, I noticed a young woman across the aisle, furiously scribbling in a notebook. Her long dark hair fell in a curtain around her face, and her leg bounced with nervous energy. "Excuse me," I said, leaning toward her. "I don't suppose you know when we're due to arrive in New York, do you?" She looked up, her eyes wide and slightly manic. "New York," she repeated, letting out a hysterical giggle. "Oh, honey, there is no New York. Not anymore. There's only the train." I felt my blood run cold. "What are you talking about?" She leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I've been on this train for, I don't know how long. Days, weeks? It all blurs together. But I figured it out. We're not going anywhere. We're stuck in a loop, a never-ending journey to nowhere." I shook my head, refusing to believe it. "That's impossible. You're just confused. Maybe you fell asleep and missed your stop." She laughed again, a sound devoid of humor. "Oh, I wish it were that simple. But look around you. Have you seen anyone get off? Have we stopped at any stations? This isn't a normal train, Jack. This is something else entirely." I startled at the sound of my own name. "How do you know my name?" She smiled, a sad, knowing expression. "I heard you talking to old Howard in the dining car. I'm Lisa, by the way. And welcome aboard the Eternal Express." I stood up abruptly, my head spinning. "This is insane. All of you are insane. I'm going to find the conductor and get some answers." As I stormed off toward the front of the train, I heard Lisa call after me, "Good luck with that. But don't say I didn't warn you." I made my way through car after car, each one identical to the last, the same faded blue seats, the same flickering overhead lights, the same blank-faced passengers staring into nothingness. It felt like I'd been walking for hours, but that was impossible on a train of normal length. Finally, I reached what should have been the engine car, But instead of a locomotive, I found myself in another passenger car, exactly like all the others. I spun around, disoriented. How could this be? A hand on my shoulder made me jump. I turned to find the attendant from earlier, her pinched face now twisted into an unnaturally wide smile. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. "I need to speak to the conductor," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "There's been some kind of mistake. This train should have reached New York by now." Her smile never wavered. "I'm sorry, sir, but there is no conductor, and there is no mistake. You're exactly where you're supposed to be." I backed away from her, my heart pounding. What is this place? What's happening? She tilted her head, her eyes suddenly black and empty. "This is the last line, Mr. Thurston. The train that never stops never ends. You bought a ticket, and now you're on the ride of eternity." I turned and ran, pushing past confused passengers, my breath coming in ragged gasps. This couldn't be happening. It had to be a dream, a hallucination, anything but reality. I burst into the space between the cars, the cold night air hitting me like a slap. The door to the next car was a few feet away. If I could reach it, maybe I could find a way off this nightmare train. But as I stepped forward, the gap between the cars seemed to stretch, the next door moving further and further away, no matter how fast I ran. The wind howled around me, drowning out my screams of frustration and fear. Suddenly, a hand grabbed my arm, yanking me back into the car. I fell to the floor, gasping for breath. Lisa stood over me, her face pale in the flickering light. "Are you crazy?" she hissed. "You can't go out there between the cars. That's where it gets you." "Where? What gets you?" I asked, my voice shaking. She helped me to my feet, glancing nervously at the door. "The thing that runs this train. The thing that brought us all here. Trust me, you don't want to meet it." As if on cue, a low rumbling sound echoed through the car. It was like nothing I'd ever heard before, part machine, part animal, all wrong. The lights flickered more intensely, and for a moment, I could have sworn I saw something massive moving in the shadows between the cars. Lisa pulled me back to our seats. Her grip on my arm was painful. "Listen to me," she said urgently. "I know this is hard to accept. God knows I've fought against it for I don't even know how long. But fighting only makes it worse. You have to accept where you are, or you'll go mad." I slumped in my seat, my mind reeling. But why? Why is this happening? What is this place? She shook her head. "I don't know. None of us do. All we know is that we're here on this never-ending journey. Some think it's hell, others purgatory. Old Howard thinks it's some kind of cosmic mistake. Me? I think it's just the universe's way of saying tough luck, kid do." I looked out the window, watching the same moonlit landscape roll by. How many times had I seen those same fields, those same trees? How long would I continue to see them? "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Lisa gave me a sad smile. "We ride, we talk. We try to stay sane. And we hope that maybe, just maybe, one day we'll reach the last stop." As the train rode on into the endless night, I realized with a sinking heart that my journey had only just begun, and my destination remained a terrifying mystery. I live alone, so who keeps writing messages on my mirror? I turned 18 in 2008, and on my birthday, for reasons I won't bore you with, I packed up my things and moved out. For 4 years, I lived in my car, working as a barista from 6 to 2 and as a line cook from 4 to 10. My plan was to work until I had enough money to get my own place, then either go to college or find a real job. Looking back, I don't know how I did it, but by 22, I'd saved a decent amount and began my search for a semi-permanent place to live. I was in Los Angeles at the time, and though housing prices weren't as high as they are now, it was still an expensive area. After months of asking around, I was connected with Anders, an elderly man renting out a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house in North Hollywood for far below market rate. The catch is there's always a catch with affordable housing was that the house had been terribly maintained. It had been unoccupied for a year and needed serious TLC before it could be comfortably lived in. However, after living out of a car for 4 years, as long as the place had running water, it was an upgrade for me. I moved into the house in fall 2012. Anders gave me a tour before I got settled. He was a short, cheerful old man, well-meaning but a bit scatterbrained, likely due to his age. At one point during the tour, he showed me the bathroom, then the master bedroom, then the bathroom again. He was about to walk into the bathroom a third time before I gently guided him down the hall. The house itself was livable but worn, with dim lighting from outdated fixtures casting long shadows over peeling wallpaper. The ceiling in many rooms was discolored from past leaks. The faucet in the kitchen sink was broken, the bathtub was badly chipped, and a few cabinet handles came off in my hand. It was a rundown place in a bars on the windows kind of neighborhood, but it was mine. I was smiling ear to ear when Anders handed me the keys. "It's a good house with good bones," he told me. "You take care of it now." I found that ironic, given its condition. Before he left, he paused in the doorway, looking back into the house. "Is everything all right?" I asked. Yes, just something looks different about that bathroom, though I can't put my finger on it." He shook his head, smiled, and said, "Take care of it now." And with that, he left me to unpack. I hadn't realized how much I missed having a house. I didn't care about its condition. Having a bathroom and a full-size mattress to sleep on felt like pure luxury. After a few days of cleaning, I invited my sister and her fiancé over for dinner. It sounds silly, but being able to host company made me proud. I settled into the place quickly. That night, after my guests left, I took a shower. The bathroom didn't have a traditional mirror above the sink. Instead, it had a full-length mirror mounted on the wall to the left of the vanity. When I stepped out of the shower and wiped the fog from the glass, I noticed something odd. In the condensation at eye level was the word "hi." I didn't know what to make of it. The letters seemed intentional. It was hard to brush off as just random steam patterns. My sister had used the bathroom before she left, so I thought maybe she'd written it as a joke. I almost texted her about it, but the message seemed ridiculous when I typed it out, paranoid even. I wiped the mirror down and turned in for the night, soon forgetting about it. The following week, I got a promotion at one of my jobs. The extra income was nice, but my new position meant longer days. I also realized that a few repairs in the house were beyond my skills, so I started hiring contractors. It was annoying only having the place to myself at night, but I didn't have another option with my schedule. One night I came home, took a shower, and as I stepped out, noticed another message on the mirror. This time it read, "Staying long." That was no coincidence. Someone had been in my bathroom recently. I had contractors in and out of the house all the time, so maybe one of them had written it. But why? My heart raced as I checked the house locked doors, closed windows, nothing out of place. If someone had been inside, they were long gone by the time I looked around. For days, I was on edge. I triple-checked the locks each night and inspected every corner of the house before bed. Though I felt secure, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. A month passed without incident, and I began to feel at home again until one Friday morning. I woke up around 3 a.m. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. The house settled at night, creaking and groaning in ways that made it sound alive. But now it was silent. I then noticed my bedroom door, which I was sure I had closed, wide open. I stared into the dark hallway, feeling as though I was gazing into a black hole. Somehow, I found the courage to get up and shut the door. I didn't check the hallway or the rest of the house. I just dragged a small bookcase in front of the door and went back to bed, hoping it would at least alert me if someone tried to come in. The next night, after a long day at work, I took a quick shower, and as I stepped out, I saw a new message on the mirror. This one was bold, the clearest yet, "I see you." A mixture of fear and anger churned in my stomach. I quickly dried off, threw on some clothes, grabbed my phone, and dialed Anders. I glared at the mirror, listening to the phone ring, wondering if it was too late for him to be awake. Finally, he picked up. "How's the place treating you?" he asked, cheerful as always. "Is there a way someone could be getting into the house?" I blurted out, cutting him off. "I check the windows and doors every night. I've checked every cabinet, every closet, but things keep happening. Is there an entry point I don't know about?" "What's getting in?" he asked, sounding puzzled. "If you're having rat troubles, my last tenant had that too." "Sure, yeah, maybe it's rats," I said, exasperated. "Besides the doors and windows, how else could something be getting in?" "Well, there's the vents, of course. And the chimney, though we sealed that up a long time ago. And then there's the crawl space, of course." "I know there's a crawl space, but I've never found the entrance," I replied, recalling that even after tearing up carpet, I hadn't seen an access point. "The crawl space entrance is in the bathroom closet," he said, almost casually. I looked around the bathroom, puzzled. "The bathroom doesn't have a closet." "Sure it does, just to the left of the vanity," he said. I looked at the oversized full-length mirror beside the vanity. I'd always found it odd for a small bathroom to have such a large mirror. I remembered Anders mentioning something looked different about the bathroom when he last visited. Setting my phone on the counter, I stepped up to the mirror and felt around the edges. I found a grip on the right side of the frame, and with one hard yank, the mirror swung open like a door, revealing a large walk-in closet. I was too stunned to speak as I stared into the closet. At the back was a square-shaped hole in the floor, likely leading down to the crawl space. The floor was littered with trash, filthy sheets, fast food containers, beer cans, and I saw some of my own belongings: a sock, a toothbrush, a comb, and a framed photo of me with my sister and our family dog. Horrified, I picked up the photo, studying it with trembling hands. That's when I heard Anders' voice on the phone, except it didn't sound like Anders anymore. The voice was too close, too clear, too deep. When I looked up, a man was peeking out from the hole in the floor. He grinned at me, his eyes wide, his smile stretched painfully across his face. His long, matted hair framed a head that looked disembodied in the harsh light. Terrified, I bolted from the bathroom, ran out of the house, and drove to my sister's place. The next day, I went to the police and filed a report. An officer came to inspect the house, and I showed him the hidden closet and the crawl space entrance. We guessed the intruder had been entering through a small side door to the crawl space, squatting there since before I moved in. He likely covered the closet door to keep a room for himself. The man was never found. I moved across the county and have lived in studio apartments ever since. The thought of living in a big house, with all its hidden places, fills me with dread. And it's not just houses that the experience soured for me, but mirrors as well. To this day, I inspect every mirror at friends' homes and hotels, shining a light into it and tapping to make sure it's solid. The most unsettling detail I learned from this ordeal: when the police officer revisited the bathroom, I stepped into the closet, closed the mirror door, and looked into the glass. Instead of my reflection, I saw his face on the other side of the mirror. Driving deliveries for a small courier firm isn't my dream job, but it covers the bills. Most of the time, the work is straightforward: pick up the package, drop it off, repeat. I usually do day shifts, but with the holiday rush, I was asked to cover some night deliveries. At first, I was fine with it, driving through quiet streets with no traffic, listening to my favorite podcasts. On my first night, I was scheduled to deliver a few packages to a business district about an hour outside of town. It was already dark by the time I left the warehouse, the kind of cold, moonless night that made everything seem a little more sinister. Still, I wasn't too worried. I'd done late-night runs before and never had any issues. The business district I was heading to was an odd spot, though. It was part of an industrial park with rows of warehouses and offices, tucked away in a remote area just off the main highway. The place was pretty much deserted. After dark, no one worked there at night, which meant it was usually quiet. Almost too quiet. As I drove down the long stretch of road leading to the industrial park, I kept telling myself it was just another delivery in and out. But something felt different that night. The air felt heavier, and there was a sense of unease I couldn't shake. I arrived at the industrial park just before midnight. The whole area was eerily silent, with only a few dim streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. The warehouses and office buildings loomed like silent giants, their windows dark and uninviting. I parked my van in front of the first building on my route, a large, nondescript office with a plain concrete exterior. I grabbed the package from the back of the van and walked toward the entrance. It was supposed to be a simple drop-off: scan the package, leave it in the designated drop box, and go. But as I approached the door, I noticed something strange. The front door was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see the dim glow of a flickering light inside. That wasn't normal. The place should have been locked up for the night with no one around. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if I should go inside to see if anyone was there, but my instincts told me to just drop the package and leave. I decided to leave it in the drop box and get out of there. As I scanned the package, I felt like someone was watching me. I couldn't explain it. It was just this creeping sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I finished the delivery and quickly walked back to my van, trying to shake off the feeling. But as I climbed into the driver's seat and glanced back at the building, the door was now closed. I told myself it was nothing, maybe the wind had blown the door shut. even though I didn't hear any noise. Still, I couldn't shake the unease as I headed to my next delivery. The next stop was a warehouse on the far edge of the industrial park, even more isolated than the first location. I followed the narrow, winding road that led to the building, my headlights the only light. The warehouse loomed ahead, its metal siding glinting faintly in the dim light. I parked the van near the entrance and grabbed the package. As I approached the door, I saw something, or rather, someone standing near the back of the building. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light, but as I got closer, I could make out the figure of a man standing perfectly still near the loading dock. He wasn't moving, just standing there facing away from me. His posture was unnaturally stiff, like he was waiting for something. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing through the quiet night. "You work here?" The figure didn't respond. He didn't move at all. I felt my heart rate quicken as I took a step closer, my hand tightening around the package. Something about the way he was standing, the stillness of it, sent a chill down my spine. I took another step forward, but just as I did, the figure vanished. I blinked, my mind racing to make sense of what I had just seen. 1 second he was there, and the next he was gone, like he'd just disappeared into thin air. A wave of nausea washed over me as I quickly dropped off the package and rushed back to my van. I started the engine, my hands shaking, and sped out of there without looking back. The rest of my deliveries were supposed to be routine, but after the encounter at the warehouse, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Every time I turned a corner or parked outside another building, a part of me thought I might see that figure standing there, watching me. It wasn't until my final delivery of the night that things really took a turn for the worse. My last stop was at a small office building at the very edge of the industrial park. The place looked abandoned, no lights, no cars in the lot, and the windows were covered in grime like no one had been there for years. But the address matched the one on the package, so I figured it was just an old building that hadn't been updated in the system. I parked the van and got out, the cold air biting at my skin. The silence was deafening, broken only by the soft crunch of gravel under my boots as I walked toward the building. As I approached the front door, I noticed something strange, a piece of paper taped to the glass. It looked like some kind of note, hastily written in red marker. I squinted in the dim light, trying to make out the words. "Leave now. You're being watched." My heart skipped a beat. I stared at the note, my mind racing. Was this some kind of prank, a joke left by a bored employee? But then I remembered the figure I'd seen earlier, and my stomach churned with dread. Suddenly, the air felt heavier, suffocating. I glanced around, but the lot was empty. I was alone, or at least I thought I was. I dropped the package at the door, my hands trembling, and turned to head back to the van. But as I started walking, I heard a soft rustling sound coming from behind me. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Slowly, I turned around. The figure was back. He was standing in the shadows near the corner of the building, just far enough away that I couldn't make out his features. But I knew it was him, the same figure I'd seen at the warehouse, the same unnerving stillness, the same eerie presence. He didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stood there. Panic surged through me as I turned and ran to the van, my heart pounding in my ears. I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the door open. I threw myself into the driver's seat, slammed the door, and locked it. But as I started the engine, I saw him again. He was standing in the middle of the road, directly in front of the van. His face was still obscured by shadows, but I could feel his eyes on me, burning through the darkness. I didn't wait, I floored the gas pedal, swerving around him. My headlights caught a brief glimpse of his figure as I sped past, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, he was gone. I drove out of that industrial park as fast as I could, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. I kept looking in the mirrors, but the road behind me was empty. I didn't stop driving until I was back on the highway, miles away from the industrial park. My heart was still racing, and my mind was spinning with questions. Who was that figure? Why was he following me? And what the hell did that note mean? I tried to calm myself down, telling myself it was just some kind of prank or coincidence, but deep down I knew it wasn't. Something about that night felt different, like I had crossed some invisible line into a place I wasn't supposed to be. I finished my route and returned to the warehouse to drop off the van, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. As I handed in my keys and clocked out, I saw the dispatcher looking at me with a strange expression. He opened his mouth like he was going to say something, But then he shook his head and handed me my receipt. "Everything okay?" I asked, my voice sounding more casual than I felt. He hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, it's just strange. Another driver reported seeing someone hanging around the industrial park last week. Said it creeped him out." My stomach dropped. "Did they say what he looked like?" I asked. He shook his head. "No, just said he felt like he was being followed." I didn't say anything after that. I just left. It's been a few days since that night, and I haven't gone back to work. I told them I was sick, but the truth is, I'm scared. Scared that if I go back, I'll see him again. If these stories kept you on edge, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling content. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss a chilling upload. Have your own night shift horror story. Share it in the comments below. We'd love to hear it. Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes the scariest things happen when the world is asleep. Until next time, keep the lights on, and I'll see you in the next nightmare. I've been working the night shift at this warehouse for about 6 months. Honestly, it's not a bad job. Boring? Yes, but not bad. I come in around 10 p.m., clock in, and spend the next 8 hours restocking shelves, organizing inventory, and preparing shipments. The warehouse is massive, filled with rows upon rows of towering shelves that stretch far into the distance. And at night, it's just me in the quiet. I'm not sure when it started. At first, I figured I was just tired. Working night shifts does that to you. Your mind plays tricks on you in the dark, especially in a place as big and empty as this. But lately, I've been hearing things. Little noises, footsteps, the soft creak of metal, and a faint scratching sound like something being dragged across the floor. I tried to brush it off, thinking it must be rats or pigeons. But something about the way those sounds echoed the warehouse, bouncing off the concrete floors and towering shelves, felt off, like someone was in there with me. But that's impossible. I'm the only one working the night shift, or so I thought. The first time I really noticed something strange, it was a Thursday night a few weeks ago. I was restocking one of the back aisles, the kind that doesn't get much foot traffic even during the day. I had a pallet of boxes to unload and was deep into the task when I heard a faint clatter, like something had fallen over. I paused, the sound echoing through the aisles, and for a moment I stood there listening. Nothing. I shook my head, figuring it was just something that had shifted on the shelves. But then I heard it again, this time closer. I grabbed my flashlight and peered down the aisle. Everything seemed normal. The shelves were in place, the boxes stacked where I left them. I stood there for a moment, straining to hear anything else, but there was only silence. I shrugged it off, trying to convince myself that I was being paranoid. It was just the building settling. That's what I told myself until the following night. I was organizing inventory near the back of the warehouse, the farthest point from the loading dock. The lights were always dimmer back there, and the air felt cooler, almost like the temperature dropped a few degrees the further back you went. It was probably just a quirk of the building, but it always made me feel uneasy. I was about halfway through my shift when I saw a shadow. It darted between the rows of shelves. My hand gripped the box cutter a little tighter as my eyes scanned the aisles. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing in the silence. No response. I stood there, waiting for the shadow to reappear, but nothing happened. I took a deep breath and moved closer to where I'd seen it, shining my flashlight down the aisle, but there was nothing, just row after row of boxes and shelves, all neatly organized. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I was just tired. It wouldn't be the first time my mind played tricks on me during a long shift. But something about the way that shadow moved didn't feel like a trick. Still, I pushed the thought aside and kept working, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The following week, the noises started getting worse. It wasn't just random clattering or the hum of the building anymore. I started hearing footsteps. Clear, unmistakable footsteps. It always happened around the same time, sometime after midnight. I'd be working, minding my own business, when I'd hear them footsteps echoing through the warehouse. Sometimes they seemed far away, but other times they sounded like they were coming from the next aisle over. I'd drop whatever I was doing and rush over, but no one was ever there. It didn't make sense. There were security cameras all over the warehouse, and I checked them whenever I heard something strange. Nothing. I was alone. But those footsteps, they were real. I know they were. One night, after hearing the footsteps yet again, I decided to check the security footage more carefully. I went to the management office and started scrolling through the feed. Everything seemed normal until I got to the footage from the back of the warehouse. There on the screen I saw a figure. It was faint, almost like a blur, but it was there, moving between the rows of shelves, just like I'd seen out of the corner of my eye. I paused the footage and stared at the screen, my heart racing. I couldn't make out any details, just the shape of a person moving too quickly for the camera to focus. That's when I realized I wasn't imagining things. Something or someone was in the warehouse with me. The next night, I almost didn't come to work. I'd been feeling on edge for weeks, but I couldn't afford to miss a shift. Rent was due, and I needed the paycheck. So I clocked in, grabbed my clipboard, and got to work, trying to ignore the pit of dread in my stomach. Everything was fine for the first couple of hours, quiet, just like it always was. But around midnight, things started to go wrong. I was stacking boxes in one of the far aisles when I heard a crash from the front of the warehouse. My heart jumped into my throat as I grabbed my flashlight and hurried toward the sound. When I got there, I found a pallet of boxes scattered across the floor. It looked like someone had shoved them over. I checked the security feed again, but the footage was useless, just static. That had never happened before. I felt my stomach twist with unease as I tried to figure out what to do. Was someone messing with me, or was it something else? Before I could make a decision, the lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. I was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the faint beam of my flashlight. That's when I heard the footsteps. But this time they weren't far away. They were close. Too close. I stood there, frozen, listening as the footsteps grew louder, closer. My flashlight shook in my hand as I slowly turned around, shining the beam down the aisle. And that's when I saw a figure standing at the far end of the aisle. It was tall, its face obscured by shadows, but I could make out the faint outline of a person. They were just standing there, staring at me. I could feel my heart thudding against my ribs as I tried to process what I was seeing. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. "What do you want?" The figure didn't respond. I took a step back, my hands shaking as I tried to keep the flashlight steady. The figure didn't move, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and unrelenting. And then, without warning, it started moving toward me. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I turned and ran, sprinting down the aisle as fast as I could. I could hear the footsteps behind me, echoing off the walls. I darted through the maze of shelves, trying to find a way out. The warehouse felt like a labyrinth, the rows of boxes stretching out endlessly in every direction. I could hear the figure gaining on me, its footsteps growing louder with each passing second. Finally, I reached the loading dock. I slammed my hand against the emergency door release, and with a loud beep, the door swung open. I stumbled outside, gasping for breath, and turned to look behind me. The figure was gone. The warehouse was silent once more, as if nothing had happened. I stood there, trembling, trying to catch my breath. My mind raced with questions, but I didn't have any answers. I didn't know who or what that figure was, but I knew one thing for sure: I was never going back in there again. I quit the next day. The warehouse was haunted or cursed or something. I didn't care. All I knew was that whatever had been in there with me that night wasn't human. I don't know what I saw that night, and I don't want to know. When I first took the night shift at the office, I wasn't exactly thrilled. But the extra pay was too good to pass up. My department was on a tight deadline for a major project, and someone needed to stay late to monitor progress and make sure everything stayed on track. I volunteered, figuring it would just be a few quiet hours to catch up on work without distractions. The office building itself was a typical corporate setup: rows of cubicles, a break room with a coffee machine that never worked right, and fluorescent lights that buzzed just enough to drive you crazy. During the day, the place was bustling with people, the hum of phones ringing and keyboards clacking filling the air. But at night, when everyone else had gone home, it felt different. There's something unsettling about an empty office at night. The rows of cubicles stretch out like a maze, the dim emergency lighting casting strange shadows. I could hear every little sound: the creak of the building settling, the faint hum of the air conditioning. Even my own breathing seemed too loud. At first, the quiet was a relief. I liked the solitude, the peace of it all. But after a few nights, the peace started to feel more like isolation. And then, strange things began to happen. One night, I was working on a report when I heard a faint rustling sound coming from across the room. I looked up, expecting to see one of the cleaning crew. but the office was empty. I shrugged it off, figuring it was just some building system kicking in. But the sound kept coming, papers shuffling, chairs creaking, as if someone was moving around just out of sight. It was subtle, almost too subtle to notice at first, but once I heard it, I couldn't unhear it. I stood up and walked around the office, checking the cubicles, but there was no one there. It's just an old building, I reminded myself. Buildings make noises, that's all it is. But then things started to get weirder. The next night I came back from a break to find the papers on my desk scattered across the floor. At first I thought maybe I had knocked them off without realizing it, but as I bent down to pick them up, I noticed something strange. The papers weren't just scattered, they were arranged, spread out in a way that seemed deliberate. I felt a chill creep down my spine. I was the only one in the office, wasn't I? I checked the security system, all the doors were locked, and no one had come in or out since I arrived. I laughed it off, telling myself I was just being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. That's when the footsteps started. It was late, probably close to midnight, and I was working on some spreadsheets, the glow of my monitor the only light in the office. I was deep into my work when I heard footsteps echoing down the hallway, just outside the cubicles. I froze, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was walking down the hallway toward me. I strained to listen, trying to figure out who it could be. Maybe someone from the cleaning crew had arrived late, or maybe another employee had decided to pull an all-nighter. But no matter how hard I listened, I couldn't hear any doors opening or closing, no rustling of cleaning supplies, just those footsteps. I stood up, my chair creaking as I pushed it back. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the empty office. No response. I stepped out of my cubicle, peeking around the corner into the hallway. It was empty, the footsteps had stopped. My heart was racing now, and I could feel a cold sweat forming on the back of my neck. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, that I was hearing things because I was tired. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. I went back to my desk, but I couldn't focus. Every little sound, the hum of the air conditioning, the soft ticking of the clock set my nerves on edge. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see someone standing there watching me, but no one was there. A few nights later, the situation reached a new level. I was sitting at my desk finishing up a report when I saw something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow moving across the wall behind me. It was quick, just a flicker, but it was enough to make me turn around. There was nothing there. I turned back to my computer, trying to focus, but the shadow kept appearing just at the edge of my vision. It was like someone was standing behind me. You know that indistinguishable feeling, that sense of a presence behind you. But every time I turned to look, the room was empty. The breaking point was when I caught a glimpse of something in my monitor, a reflection, just behind me. In the dim light of the office, I saw the outline of a figure. I spun around, my breath catching in my throat, but there was no one there. The office was empty, as it always was. But the reflection had been real. I knew it was. That's when I started to panic. I called security, asking them to check the cameras, but they found nothing. No one had entered or left the building all night. I was alone, at least I was supposed to be. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every time I came in from my shift, I felt eyes on me, even though I was the only one there. I started hearing voices, faint whispers, just on the edge of hearing. I'd be sitting at my desk and I'd hear my name like someone was calling me from down the hall. But when I went to check, there was never anyone there. The footsteps became more frequent too. I'd hear them almost every night, walking up and down the hallways, sometimes stopping just outside my cubicle. I'd sit there, frozen, waiting for them to move on, but they wouldn't. They'd just stop, and I'd feel the overwhelming sense that someone was standing there, just on the other side of the wall, waiting for me to move. One night, after a particularly unsettling encounter where I'd seen a shadow pass by the window, even though I was on the 12th floor, I decided I needed to get to the bottom of this. I started asking around, trying to find out if anyone else had experienced anything strange in the building. That's when I learned about the accident. Years ago, before I started working there, an employee had died in the building. She had been working late one night, just like me, when she had a heart attack. No one found her until the next morning when the cleaning crew came in. She had been lying in her cubicle, her face pale and her eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The story sent chills down my spine. Could it be her? Was she the one haunting the office, unable to move on. I tried to brush it off as an old office legend, just a story meant to spook the night shift workers. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than that. The footsteps, the shadows, the whispers, they all started after I had taken the night shift, and they were getting worse. One night I was finishing up my work when I felt it again, that cold presence, the feeling of being watched. I stood up and looked around. The empty office was quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it, a soft voice whispering my name. I turned toward the sound. The lights flickered, and for a split second, I saw her, a figure standing at the far end of the office, just beyond the glow of my desk lamp. She was pale, her eyes wide and vacant, her hair hanging limp around her face. I froze, unable to move, unable to breathe. She took a step forward, her feet making no sound on the carpeted floor. The lights flickered again, and she was gone. I grabbed my things and ran out of the office, not bothering to turn off my computer or lock up. I didn't care, I just needed to get out. I never went back to the night shift after that. I told my boss I couldn't do it anymore, and I didn't give him a reason. I didn't need to. The office is still there, of course. People still work late shifts, but no one ever talks about the strange things that happen after dark. The cleaning crew has their own stories, whispers of shadows moving in the hallways, of footsteps that shouldn't be there. But no one ever stays late alone anymore. As for me, I've moved on. I got a new job in a new building, and I don't work nights anymore. But I'll never forget that face, those empty, staring eyes. And I know that she's still there. I've worked as a night security guard for a few years now. It's not a bad gig, easy money for the most part, and I've come to appreciate the quiet. After all, in this job, a peaceful night means a successful night. The building I'm stationed at is a corporate office downtown, one of those glass towers that looks impressive during the day, but feels almost haunted when it's empty at night. Most nights, I'm the only one here. I sit in the security office, monitor the cameras, patrol the hallways a couple of times, and lock up the place. It's monotonous, but I prefer it that way, the quiet hum of the building systems, the soft glow of the security monitors. It all became routine. Then there's Martin. He's the janitor on the same shift as me, and from the moment I met him, something about him didn't sit right. He's an older guy, probably in his late 50s or early 60s, with thinning gray hair and a way of moving that's too quiet. I don't know if it's his hunched posture or the way he always seems to appear without making a sound, but I can never shake the feeling that he's watching me even when I don't see him. At first it was just a gut feeling, nothing I could pinpoint. He was polite enough, keeping to himself and occasionally nodding if we passed each other in the hallways. But over time, the strangeness started to add up. One night I was doing my usual rounds, checking the locks, walking the hallways, when I saw him standing in one of the empty offices on the 16th floor. The lights were off, but the glow from the hallway illuminated him just enough. He wasn't cleaning, he was just standing there, staring out the window. His reflection in the glass looked wrong, distorted somehow. I stood there for a moment, unsure of whether to say something. It felt like I was intruding, even though I was technically the one supposed to be there. Finally, I cleared my throat. "Everything okay, Martin?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He didn't turn around, completely ignoring me. He just kept staring out the window. I waited a few more seconds before walking away, an unease settling deep in my gut. That was the first time I felt something was seriously off with him, but it was just the beginning. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing other things, small things at first, but enough to raise alarm bells in the back of my mind. For one, Martin would always be in places where he had no reason to be. The janitorial staff had designated areas, but I'd find him wandering the upper floors at odd hours, sometimes just standing in the middle of a hallway, as if waiting for something. The worst part, he would always seem to vanish the moment I turned the corner. I'd see him in the reflection of the glass doors, but by the time I reached that spot, he was gone. I tried telling myself I was being paranoid. It's easy for the mind to play tricks when you're alone at night in a massive, empty building. But then things started happening that I couldn't explain. It began with the cameras. One night, I was watching the security monitors when I noticed static on one of the feeds. That's not unusual, the cameras glitch from time to time. But this was different. The static would flicker for a second, and then Martin would appear on the screen, standing perfectly still in a hallway I knew I had just checked. He wouldn't move, wouldn't clean, just stand there, staring at something off camera. Then, just as suddenly, the feed would cut out, and when it came back, he'd be gone. At first, I chalked it up to a technical error, but it kept happening. Always the same camera, always the same unsettling image of him standing in the hallway, staring into nothingness. Then there were the items. Things started going missing from my desk: a pen here, a keycard there. I thought maybe I was just being careless until I found them in strange places. An office supply closet that hadn't been used in months, or a stairwell nobody ever used. How were they getting there, and why? The night everything changed, I decided to confront Martin. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow involved in the strange happenings around the building. I didn't know if he was messing with me, trying to scare me, or if something darker was going on, but I needed answers. It was a little past 2 a.m. when I saw him again on the cameras. He was on the lower level near the basement, a place he never had any reason to go. I watched as he stood outside one of the maintenance rooms, his hand resting on the door. This time, I wasn't going to just watch. I grabbed my flashlight and headed downstairs, moving as quickly and quietly as I could. The lower level was colder than the rest of the building, the air thick with the fume of the HVAC system. My footsteps echoed off the concrete walls, amplifying the growing sense of dread in my chest. When I reached the maintenance room, the door was slightly ajar, and Martin was nowhere to be seen. I hesitated for a second before pushing it open. Inside, the room was filled with cleaning supplies, tools, and spare parts for the building systems, but something felt wrong off somehow. I shined my flashlight around, the beam cutting through the dimly lit space, and that's when I saw it, a door. Not a regular door, this one was hidden behind a large metal shelving unit, almost as if someone had intentionally tried to conceal it. My heart raced as I moved the shelf aside, revealing the door fully. There was no handle, just a small keyhole and a rusted plaque that read, "Authorized personnel only." I knew I shouldn't go, and every instinct told me to turn back, to leave this room and forget I had ever seen it. But my curiosity and fear drove me forward. I found a key on one of the shelves that fit the lock, and with a deep breath, I turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow stairwell that led down into darkness. I don't know what possessed me to go down those stairs. Maybe it was a need to prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind, that there was a logical explanation for everything that had been happening. Or maybe it was the realization that I couldn't live with the uncertainty anymore. The stairs seemed to go on forever, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The smell hit me first, musty, damp, and something else, something metallic. My flashlight flickered as I reached the bottom, casting long, distorted shadows against the cracked cement walls. At the end of the hallway was another door, this one even older, its wood warped and splintering with age. I hesitated, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. The cold metal sent a shiver up my arm, and with a sense of impending dread, I pushed it open. What I saw inside will haunt me for the rest of my life. The room was small, no bigger than a storage closet, but it was filled with items, boxes, and shelves overflowing with photographs, clothing, personal effects. And then there were the more disturbing things: tufts of hair, blood-stained rags, and bones. I stumbled backward, barely able to comprehend what I was seeing. In the center of the room was a small rusted cot, and on it lay a faded photograph of a family, Martin's family. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut. I spun around, my flashlight beam shaking as I frantically searched for a way out. And that's when I saw him, Martin, standing in the doorway, his expression calm, his eyes glinting in the dim light. He didn't say a word, he didn't need to. The look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. He had been waiting for this moment. "You shouldn't have come down here," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. I took a step back, my heart racing, my mind scrambling for a way out. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice shaking. Martin smiled, a slow, sinister smile that sent chills down my spine. "This," he said, gesturing to the room around him, "is where I keep the things I care about." I felt bile rise in my throat as I realized what he meant. This wasn't just a storage room, it was a shrine, a tomb. I didn't wait for him to make a move. I bolted toward the door, pushing past him with all the strength I could muster. He reached out, trying to grab me, but I managed to break free, running up the stairs 2 at a time. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, but I didn't look back. I burst through the door at the top of the stairs, slamming it shut behind me. My hands shook as I fumbled with the lock. I didn't stop running until I was back in the security office, slamming the door and locking it behind me. I called the police, my fingers trembling as I dialed, barely able to explain what had happened. The police arrived within minutes, but when they searched the building, Martin was gone. The room in the basement was exactly as I had left it, but there was no sign of him. They found evidence, enough to launch a full investigation, but to this day they've never found him. I quit the job the next morning. It's been months since that night, but I still can't shake the feeling that he's out there watching, waiting, and sometimes late at night, I swear I can hear the sound of his footsteps echoing down the empty hallways, just like before. Only now I'm not there to stop him. David watches Maine. I call him David. For the past month or so, he's been watching me. I've seen things beyond what I can comprehend, horrors that feel almost unreal. Growing up, I was a massive fan of horror. When I was very young, my mom used to take my older sibling and me to the library to borrow Goosebumps CDs. I must have been about 3 or 4 years old. Even back then, fear wasn't something that stuck with me. I was born in Montana on March 3rd, 2003, but around the time I turned 4 or 5, my dad had to find a different job. The housing crisis had just begun, and without a college degree, he took whatever work he could find. That led us to Sheridan, Wyoming, a small town just below the Montana border, where we moved to be closer to my mom's family. With some help from her side of the family, my dad found work as a bank teller. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get by. The move didn't bother me much since I was only in preschool, but my older sister, who already had school friends, was devastated. She cried the entire car ride while my younger sister, just a toddler, didn't understand what was going on. As the years passed, I adjusted to life in Sheridan. Despite our financial struggles, I got to experience all the typical school memories: birthday parties, after-school activities, and even a little puppy love. I understood early on that my family didn't have much money, so I didn't ask for expensive toys or gadgets. Unlike most kids my age, I didn't have a phone, and the only gaming console I owned was a Wii. All our food was either great value or generic brands. Though I wasn't popular, I was well liked, and I embraced the simple life I had. Things stayed this way until middle school. Around 6th or 7th grade, that's when I encountered David for the first time. It was winter, and our house was close enough to the middle school that my older sister, some neighborhood kids, and I could walk to and from school. We'd usually walk together unless one of us stayed late to finish a project or talk to a teacher. One evening I had stayed behind to work on an English project. By the time I finished and headed home, the sun was already setting, a rare occurrence for me back then. The route home took me through Kendrick Park, which, although beautiful in the spring and fall, felt dull and lifeless in winter. I walked carefully, trying not to slip on the icy path that wound up a small hill, bordered by a miniature forest. As I walked, I heard a rustling in the trees. That night was the first time I saw David, though I didn't call him that until later. He was tall, disturbingly tall, with pale, bare skin, and he stood there watching me in the cold. He had no clothes or hair, just a strange mist exhaling from his mouth. I stared, transfixed by his dark, empty eyes. After what felt like an eternity, I finally broke free of the trance and ran, tears blurring my vision. I stumbled several times but managed to get home, where I collapsed into my mom's arms, too shaken to explain. My sister later told me I babbled about a tall, naked man with eyes that weren't his own. My mom called the cops, but they found nothing. After that night, I would sometimes bring him up to my sister, and eventually she gave him the name David. I didn't see David again for almost a year, though the fear of that encounter lingered. Life went back to normal until one summer day when I was out with my friend Justin. We were riding our bikes, playing video games, and just trying to entertain ourselves. Justin suddenly suggested we check out his basement, which I didn't even know existed. We found a small hatch and went down, flashlights in hand. The basement was dark and cluttered with old boxes and abandoned items. As we explored, Justin suddenly froze. Standing at the only exit blocking our way was David. He was just as terrifying as I remembered, tall and silent, with those same empty eyes. Justin and I stood there, paralyzed. Finally, Justin threw an old box in David's direction, and after a few agonizing moments, David slowly left without a sound. We bolted out of the basement and didn't talk about it until we were back at my house. Years went by without another encounter. My dad eventually got a promotion and installed security cameras, and I thought maybe David had lost interest. But this January, as I was packing to move in with my girlfriend, I stumbled across some old photos. Nostalgically flipping through, I noticed something chilling. In a photo from a camping trip, David was there, standing in the background. In photo after photo, David was in the shadows, lurking. I was still processing this discovery when I looked out my window, and there he was, pressed up against the glass, smiling that unnatural grin. My girlfriend shrieked and ran from the room, calling 911. My mom heard the commotion, and everything happened in a blur. She pushed me aside, grabbed the pistol she kept for emergencies, and fired 4 shots. David let out an inhuman screech and disappeared into the night. The cops questioned us, but when they checked the security footage, it was corrupted. Now, months later, I still feel trapped, haunted by memories of David. My girlfriend has been supportive, but I need answers. I'm reaching out to see if anyone else has experienced something like this. Any advice or clues would be greatly appreciated.